Okay, so we have two more infinitives to learn this chapter also, as well as 4 applications of them, and then the perfect tense of deponents. So far we've had the two in the middle, which are the present, active and passive. Now we're going to get on the far left over there, the perfect active and passive. Well, remember present infinitives were dependent on which conjugation each verb was. So they all used the distinctive vowel of each conjugation plus RE, except for the third conjugation, which always just uses short ERE, era, regardless of whether it's nothing verbs or short I verbs. And that means to blank. Then for the passive, first, second, and fourth, just replace the last E with a long I, but third conjugation replaces the whole infinitive ending with long I. And that means to be blanked. So those were the normal present tense infinitives that you'll use 90% of the time. However, sometimes you might want to use a past infinitive. Now, what would that mean? If present infinitives are to blank or to be blanked, past infinitives would be to have blanked or to have been blanked. So how do you make these? If you take the verb esse, to be, and then tack on to the front of it a perfect stem, first off, the E will spontaneously change into an I, because you can't really say woka wese. It naturally becomes woka wise, okay? But now you'll have this form here, which is actually our perfect active infinitive. So it means to be in a state of, notice how it's green, so it's like right now, to be in a state of right now of having blanked, or we would just say it in English, to have blanked. Okay, what about the passive? Well, we have an even better way to do the passive. You see, if we had had a perfect active participle down here, then we would have used that instead of wokav, because the perfect active participle would have been ideal. Perfect active participle means having blanked. And that is what we mean by wokav. The wokav gives that idea of past tense. But we don't have perfect active participles in Latin, except for these few weird verbs called deponents, as we learned earlier on in the video. But Latin does have perfect passive participles all over everywhere. Every single fourth principal part is a perfect passive participle. And so that's going to be what's used here to make the perfect passive infinitive. Vocatus, esse, to be in a state of having been blanked. The esse means to be, and the vocatus means having been blanked. So this is a much more natural way to make an infinitive than that was down there. Now, previously we used this together with a form of sum, like vocatus sum, to make the passive voice of like vocavi, vocatus sum, I was called, or I am having been called. But now we're sticking it together not with sum as est sumus esse sunt, but just with esse. And when we do that, now we have the perfect passive infinitive, meaning to have been blanked, or to be in a state now of having been blanked back then. All right, so we now have our whole new realm of the past as far as infinitives are concerned. We've got vocare, to call, vocari, to be called, vocavisse, to have called, and vocatus esse, to have been called. So there's your 4 infinitives. Later on, we'll get a future active infinitive, and there is no future passive infinitive. Okay, next up is this great concept called relative time. And relative time is when you have 2 verbs in a sentence, one subordinate to the other in some way. Like in this case, the subordinate verb is the infinitive, because an infinitive cannot stand by itself in a sentence. To be happy? That's not a sentence, okay? You have to have a main verb. And so any infinitive that we use is going to describe action whose time is dependent on the location of the main verb. So if I move the main verb off into the future, notice how the cloud of surrounding infinitives moved with it. That's called relative time. That the time of each infinitive is determined by the time of the main verb, not by its tense. The tense only tells relatively to the main verb where it can occur, but that's all subjective. Objectively, its actual time cannot be known unless you first know the tense of the main verb. Because, like, look at this case here. We've got wokawise and wokatus esse. They are past tense, right? But look where they're sitting. They're sitting over top of the future perfect, to the right of the present, farther into the future than the present. So sometimes wokawise could describe a future event. Like, I will someday want to have seen Paris. To have seen would be a perfect infinitive. But have you seen Paris yet? No. Well, maybe, but maybe not. It's going to happen in the future. Why is that possible? Because the main verb is future. So wherever that main verb moves, the cloud of secondary verbs will move with it. All right, so that's called what again? Relative time, right. Okay, so just to recap then, we're not going to learn the future passive because it doesn't exist. Future active will get way far off in the future, but it's very rare. Really, this stage, we're getting pretty much 99% of all the infinitives in Latin. The second principal part gave us our two present infinitives. The third principal part gave us the perfect active infinitive down there. And the fourth principal part gives us the perfect passive infinitive. So there are your four infinitives. To blank, to be blanked, to have blanked, and to have been blanked. And that's where they come from. All right, so first we're going to learn the perfect active infinitive. So how would I make these just looking at this slide? Wokavi gave us wokawise. What did I do to get that? Well, see the separation here with the I not included in the area? The third stem without the I is what you start with. And then to that you tack on this adulterated form of esse, isse. So wokawise would have been what? To have called, right. Risisse, that's from rideo, ridere, risi, risus. To have laughed, ha ha ha. Kukurisse, it went kuro, kurare, kukuri, cursus. So this was the third one, kukuri, became kukurisse, meaning to have run. See how you're thinking about running? Okay, and then the last one, audiwisse, to have heard. Right. All right, so notice one thing. These passive infinitives do not use every case. Not genitive, not dative, not ablative. They will almost always be nominative, singular or plural, masculine, feminine, or neuter. And once in a while they'll be accusative, namely in indirect statements. But most of the time they're just nominative. Okay, so you're never going to see vocatorum esse. Never going to happen. Okay? So just make note of that. And the translations, of course, are to have been called. Now, this is the way I remember these perfect infinitives. You just move the black box. It's so easy. Boom. Wokawise, wokatus esse. What's the problem? Wokawise, active. Wokatus esse, passive. So simple. Okay? You just have to remember that the black box excludes that last I. Alrighty. And then the actual form it can take can be any of these. Translation, to have been called. Been down there will always be a sign of passive voice unless the verb is to be. In that case, I will have been may be active. For instance, to have been will be active. And in fact, you can't even make a passive of the verb to be. It would be to have been binned. To have been binned. Oh, that would be great. All right, so now that you know the four infinitives, guess what? All of those syntax structures back from chapters 10 and 11 that used infinitives, like complementary or subjective infinitive or indirect statement, all of those can now be embellished with our new kinds of infinitives. And that's what the rest of this video is going to be. We're going to be going through each of these three, practicing all the new kinds of infinitives that we can have, and seeing how they can modify the sentence, and how they let you take the sentence in new directions. So this is pretty neat. So first we have the subjective infinitive. It's possible it is for me to walk. Of course, you use a form of necessary or possible or difficult or easy. And then your doer agent, which should be your subject, is hidden or cloaked as a dative of reference. It is difficult for me. And then the actual subject of the sentence is the infinitive, to walk, or walking is for me difficult. Sometimes it is for me. So what do you think we can do now with this subjective infinitive from chapter 10? Yeah, that's right. We can change the infinitive. Here's how we'll do it. We're going to put these things onto the timeline, and then we're going to change the infinitive to a past tense infinitive. So we have to imagine our past tense realms back there, and then move the infinitive back like that. So now it's possible it is for me to have walked, ambulawisse. Or what about the passive voice up above? Possible it is for me to have been walked, like to have been walked to jail or something, like I was handcuffed. Okay, Mr. Redmond, why is it neuter with a gray UM there? Aren't you, Mr. Redmond, a masculine? Shouldn't it be ambulatus esse? Good question. Why is this neuter? Well, remember from our syntax structures way back in like chapter 3? Whenever you have a verb of to be, you have two wings of an airplane on either side of it. Now, if those two wings are both nouns, then of course they can't agree, because nouns don't change their gender or their number in any way. But if one of those wings is an adjective, then it better match the noun, right? In gender, number, case, of course they'll both be nominative. Okay, so that's what's going on here. We're saying that something is possible. And whenever we do subjective infinitive, we always use this neuter E. So that's a signal to you that the infinitive, when it's used in this context, should be the neuter form, ambulatum esse. So it's kind of the state abstractly neutrally of having been walked is possible, is what it's saying. It's not saying the state of masculinely having been walked or femininely having been walked. No. Just neutrally, abstract, like weird, whatever. Okay, just remember that the two things on either side of est have to be the same gender, unless they're both nouns. But in this case, possibile is not a noun. It's an adjective. So these two have to match. All right, ambulari, to be walked. All right, so there's the cloud of the four surrounding secondary verbs surrounding the main verb est. So wherever I move this, notice the cloud moves with them. So now it was possible for me to have been walked, like to have been walked even further in the past, back into the pluperfect area back here, which signifies time before the perfect, even more perfect than perfect. Okay, but we're not going to get pluperfect till chapter 24. Or it was possible to be walked. There, the walking occurred back then, didn't it? Even though it's a present infinitive, it's not occurring now. It's occurring back then, right? Okay. And then same with was being. It was being possible to be walked. So this is relative time. Wherever the main verb goes, the cloud of secondary verbs goes with it. Okay, so it will be possible to have been walked. There, the walking will occur someday in the future. Having been walked could be now. It's over the present, isn't it? Or it could be often a little bit in the future, still before the erit. Or it could even be in the past. It will be possible to have been walked. Like, I could say that even if I was walked an hour ago. Okay, so that's how subjective infinitives work. All right, so stop the video and try these. Of course, if you want to do this, then you need to download this PowerPoint from the link down in the video description down below. Start it and stop it and say it in Latin. Possibile est mihi punire. That's pretty easy. Of course, that was all presents. Let's try it again. Possible it was for me to have been punished. Uh-oh, what would that be? Well, take it in order. Possibile fuit mihi. And then here you've got the past because VE, and you've got the passive because of been. So the top left one, punitum esse. Okay, so if you could do this, then you've got subjective infinitives. Good. All right, let's keep going. Besides subjective infinitives, you also had complementary infinitives. Remember, volo, nolo, and possum. Guess what we're going to change here? Yep, that infinitive can now be altered. Not just deligere, but delexisse. They are able to have delighted in or chosen. They are able to have been delighted in or been chosen. Now, why isn't it neuter? Delecti is feminine. Why isn't it delectum like in the last case? Well, right, there's no possibile. So the doer of possunt is going to determine the gender of delecti. In this case, who are they? Women. They are able to have been chosen. Yeah, so the gender of the PPP there is going to depend upon which construction you're using. Subjective infinitive will use neuter. Complementary infinitive here will use usually masculine or feminine because those are normally your two doers. You don't usually have a neuter doer. And then in the future, indirect statement will use not nominative but accusatives. So it all depends which construction you're using. And then deligi, they are able to be chosen. Alrighty, so there's your cloud of possible complementary infinitives. So relative time then is the potuerant delecti esse. They were possible to have been chosen. Poterant delecti esse. They were being able, or they used to be able to have been chosen. Any of those would work. And future tense, they will be able to have been chosen. So all those are now possible and in the game. So if you think you got that pretty well, then try these. To have gone, he was able. So perfect active infinitive of go, because you see no been, so it's not passive. And then the perfect of be able. What would that be? Isse. And the perfect of able, or possum, would be what? Potuit. Isse potuit. Great. All right, so try a whole bunch of these and see if you can do it, and then move on when you're ready. Now in this next one, I want you to do it without color. Okay, so to have been owed, he is able. Been is passive voice. Apostrophe VE is past tense. So we're going to use some form of debitus aum. And then he is able would be potest. And then which gender of debitus would we use? Masculine, because it's he, right. So let's see that. Debitus esse potest. Very good. So try as many of these as you feel like you need to. And then when you're ready, move on. Okay, so our third and final infinitive construction is going to be indirect statements. If you forgot about this, this all starts from a verb of mental action. Remember, the head signifies a verb of mental action, like think or say. And then we have an accusative subject and an infinitive verb. Now, if that infinitive verb is transitive, happening against something, then we could even have a second accusative as the direct object. All right, so guess what here we're going to change? Yeah, the infinitive. Okay, so we'll use an example of Marcus confesses the gladiator to conquer. Now, you could just say, for fari fatus est. It's normally just translated say, but that's where we got our English word confess from. Let's just say. So Marcus says the gladiator to conquer. What we're going to do is we're going to put these onto the chart where they belong. This time gladiatorum is going to be like a piece of the infinitive, so it'll go with it. So what would it be if I wanted to say Marcus confesses the gladiator to have conquered yesterday, last week? We kisse. Or to have been conquered and died a week ago. What would that be? Victus esse.
Victum esse.
Why? Because it has to match gladiatorum in case. Look, you've got the form of the verb to be there in esse. Sure, it's not the main verb. Sure, it's just the tiny little subordinate clause called the indirect statement. But wherever you've got the verb to be, both wings of the airplane on either side of it better agree if they can. And yeah, we don't have two nouns here. We have a noun and an adjective, and so they can agree, and they better. Alrighty. He confesses the gladiator to have been conquered. And then to be conquered. So in this case, you're using accusatives. That's new. That's different, huh? So we had neuters in the subjective infinitive. We had any gender, usually masculine or feminine, in the complementary infinitive. And here we've got accusatives. Many ways to create the perfect passive infinitive. All right, so now relative time. Marcus was saying the gladiator to conquer. Did it happen back then? Yeah, it did. Marcus was saying the gladiator to have conquered. Did it happen even further back before the imperfect? Yeah, it did. Oops, I should have done the orange one here. Oh well, we'll do it now. Here's the orange one. Marcus said the gladiator to have conquered. Again, the conquering occurred further back than the saying. So this is just standard relative time. Marcus will say the gladiator to have been conquered. Well, maybe it already happened in the past and Marcus is just finally reporting it in the future. Or maybe the conquering has not yet happened and is still waiting to happen so that Marcus can then report it later on after that, even further in the future. So once again here you see that all that's required for these past infinitives is that they be before the main verb. It can occur anywhere back there. Of course, it could be future, present, past, anything. That's why this orange sphere fades off. It symbolizes that it keeps on going. So, if you think you got this, then try these tests. Okay, Marcus, all, omnes, all the people, to have been understood. Well, which infinitive would this be? Been makes it passive voice, apostrophe VE, blank blank ED is past tense, so we want to say something like intellectus esse. But intellectus is just a description describing something already mentioned earlier in the sentence. What was being mentioned? Right, omnes, all, so it needs to match that. Right. Intellectos esse. Marcus' mom to have been understood heard. Okay, well, matrim is mom. Notice I put it into the accusative because it's an indirect statement where you've got an accusative subject and then we need an infinitive for to have been understood. Well, the been makes it passive voice and the apostrophe VE makes it past tense. So it's going to be that top left corner again. So intellectus. Whoa, don't say that. Don't say matrim intellectus esse. What's it got to be? Intellectam esse. Very good. Match it to matrim because those are the two wings of the airplane on either side of esse. Marcus the king to glimpse was saying, what would it be? Regem conspicere dicebat. Yeah, there you go. All right. So good luck and do these a lot because the more you work at this, the better you'll get rattling it off. You probably have some things not quite straight in your mind, and if you do it a lot, then you'll get those things straight in your mind. All right. So stop the video, try these, and start it again when you're ready to move on to our next construction, ablative absolutes. Okay, so here we have ablative absolutes. And way back in chapter 14, you learned that the most common construction is noun plus noun or noun plus adjective. With Amelia as the teacher or with Amelia correct. You could say being correct. You can supply some form of be if you want to. But I also told you in that stage that one kind of adjective is what? Right. A PRAP, because participles are verbal adjectives. They're just an adjective on the outside with verbal content inside of it. So you could have Aemilia silente. You already had this, of course, with Aemilia silenting or being silent. Now, what do you think I'm going to say you could do now? All right. Noun plus PPP. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. With Aemilia having been understood. Noun plus PPP. Fourth principal part. Oh my goodness, this is so fun. Because look what you can do now. You can use this ablative absolute, this parenthetical comment, to kind of set the stage, set the scene before the current action is described. So with Aemilia having been understood back there in the past, I blah blah blah. I blah blah blah'd. So this is actually really common to have PPPs in ablative absolutes. So you really need to learn your fourth principal parts because they are very frequently used. With Aemilia understood, we did exactly what she said. So here's how this goes on the chart. If in this case we have a, what's silente here? A PRAP. And so PR refers to present, right? Alternatively, we could have PPP. What does the first P stand for? Perfect, right. So these are the two places that you can have ablative absolutes as like a secondary verb or secondary clause surrounding the main verb. So it could be with Aemilia being silent, I think, or I am thinking, or with Aemilia having been understood, I am thinking. Mr. Redmond, what about the other two corners? How are we going to do those? Have you learned yet a perfect active participle? Well, you did, didn't you? It's the same as a perfect passive participle, but for deponents. So yes, you could have this quadrant down here if you had a deponent like loquor, loqui, locutus sum. You would have Aemilia locuta with Aemilia having spoken. But that's only for deponents, so that's an exception, so I don't put it on the chart. The only reason it's down here is because it would be up here, except that it's a deponent. So if I could drag intellecta down there and change it to locuta, then that would work. So regardless of what verb you have, you still only have two possibilities, a present active participle and some form of a perfect participle. What about present passive participle? Have you ever learned one of those? Nah, it doesn't even exist in Latin. So guess what? You don't even have to worry about it. Ablative absolutes are nice. There's only two possible secondary constructions. So if I move the main verb to perfect, with Aemilia being silent, he thought. Does it still work? Sure. And she was being silent now or back then? Well, see how it's under perf, not under present? It's happening back then. That's relative time. And then with Aemilia having been understood, I thought. Does that work? Yeah, it does. It's just even further in the past. Great. Same with imperfect. With Aemilia being silent, I was thinking. And with Aemilia having been understood, I was thinking. And same with future. With Aemilia being silent, I will think. And with Aemilia having been understood, I will think. Okay, we don't translate into English very often in this course. So you might want to just skip the next 6.5 minutes, which is all about translating into English. But other teachers will want you to know this if you run into it in college. So besides the literal translation with the blank blank, there are also these 5 looser, more colloquial paraphrases that we can use instead and still convey the same meaning. You'll run into these 5 helper words again in the subjunctives. And depending whether the secondary verb is a present or later verb in green or a past and further back verb in orange, you can use 4 out of 5 of these. So if the secondary verb is a past participle like intellecta, then you have to use some 4 of these that go with apostrophe ve been. Because you're going to say when ... have been understood. Whereas if it's a present participle like silente down here in the green, then you're going to use some form of be, like when ... is silent. So the problem is that one of these just doesn't make any sense. You can't really say while have been or while has been, because while implies simultaneousness in time, whereas have been implies that one was farther back. So that just makes no sense. You can't use while if your secondary verb is a past orange one in the orange part of the cloud. Same down here. You can't really say after is. After Amelia is silent, I think. No. That's a contradiction. You should have said after Amelia was silent or when Amelia is silent, but not after is. That makes no sense. So you just really can't use that. Just be aware of that. So what they are is when, while, after, since, and although.
The first three are classified as temporal. Since is classified as causal. And although is classified as concessive.
So since is when the first thing causes the second. Although is when
the second happens in spite of the first.
You can see, however, though, that when and after work really well with have been forms. But while does not. You really just can't say while have been. It makes no sense. Same down here in the green, while and when work with be forms like is, are, will be, was being. The three green diamonds here are all be forms. Those work really well with when and with while and when. But it really just doesn't work very well to say after is. You would do better to pick when is or while is. So you'll use a green be form with a present active participle like silente, or a apostrophe ve form with a past participle like intellecta. So here for Aemilia silente cogitabam, you could translate it as while Aemilia was being silent, I was thinking. Or when Aemilia was being silent, I was thinking. You cannot really say after Aemilia was being silent, I was thinking. That just doesn't make sense because it's a present participle, not a past participle. So there's no time separation between the two verbs. Same up here. Aemilia intellecta, you could say when Aemilia had been understood, I was thinking, or you can say after Aemilia had been understood, I was thinking. But you just can't really say while Aemilia had been understood, I was thinking. It makes no sense. Okay, so same up with the futures. If it's Aemilia silente cogitabo, you could say while Aemilia is being silent, I will think. Or you could say when Aemilia will be silent, I will think. So also with Aemilia intellecta cogitabo, you could say when Aemilia will have been understood, I will think. After Aemilia will have been understood, I will think. But you can't really say while Aemilia will have been understood, I will think. Because if it was while, then they're simultaneous, but VE is not simultaneous. So that one just doesn't work. As for since and although, those can sometimes be really awesome translations if you suddenly sense that the ablative absolute is causing the main verb. Since Aemilia has been understood, I will think. I will think about it some more just because what she said was so important. It can also be a really awesome translation if you sense that the main verb is going on in spite of the ablative absolute. Then you want although. Although Aemilia has been understood, I will think for myself. So sometimes the ablative absolute does have this sense of causativeness or despiteness. So then since and although are really awesome translations. All right, so just wanted you to know that you have these 5 optional translations. Of course, the safest one is when, because that will work no matter what kind of participle you've got, orange or green. Both have when. While and after are risky because you might get it wrong, but your ear will hear that it sounds bad if you get it wrong. Since and although are not used that commonly, but they are awesome
in certain situations.
If you realize that the ablative absolute is actually causing the main verb, or in the green case, is actually enabling the main verb, then using since will make the sentence sound awesome. Like, since Amelia has been understood, our conversation is over.
See how the being over is not just after her being understood, but because of her being understood. So in a situation like this, you would want to use since.
Okay, the very last thing in this chapter. Now that we've had relative time, we can get the last thing, which is deponents. Remember, those are verbs with passive form, but active meaning. For instance, loquor, loqui, meaning I speak and to speak. These are the only two principal parts that we have had so far, but now getting the perfect tense, we're going to get the third and final principal part, locutus. And what does locutus mean? Well, locutus is what we call a PAP, perfect active participle. Remember the PPP, the perfect passive participle, like having been dragged from earlier in the video? Well, this is almost the same, but no been. It means having blanked, having spoken. So that makes it active rather than passive, which would be having been blanked. Okay, so let's of course show the second principal part in its fullness right there. Okay, so this is what a full deponent will look like in the dictionary. There are only 3 forms. And of course, just like you could tack on a form of sum to the PPP, you can also tack on a form of sum to the PAP and get the perfect tense. Having spoken I am condenses to just I spoke. So locutus sum, I spoke. Now, you had words like tractatus sum, I was dragged, and that was passive
voice.
But these are deponents, so even though this looks like a passive form down here, it's actually active
voice.
So you see that's why it is I am having spoken, or just I spoke. So this form here, even though it looks like a fourth principal part, like a PPP, actually it is closer to the third principal part, like troxy, because troxy meant I dragged, and this means I spoke. Okay, so if that was confusing, hopefully this will make it a little more clear. Let's do a direct comparison between a deponent in the black up top and a normal verb in the white down low. Both of these mean I speak, then to speak. Now, as far as the third principal part is concerned, before we can get that full third principal part, let's consider the part that means just having blanked in the past. Locutus is our perfect active participle, and dix, which was the perfect stem, third principal part without the ending I. Both of those are the parts that mean back then it happened. Okay? So both of these really mean having spoken. But add on the sum or the e and you get I spoke. Then, for the fourth principal part, dictus means having been spoken, and there is no
correlate to that
in deponents. Because deponents are already passive looking made active. We're not going to make it passive again. So deponents don't have a passive
voice.
Like you can't say loquo and it be passive. No, that's not going to work. So anything in black
has no passive voice.
Okay, so now we have 2 past participles to deal with. The PPP and the PAP. Passive is having been, and active is
having.
All right, so of course to this we can add on sum and get I was spoken. But of course there's no such thing in the deponents, and so that's the way it looks. Okay, so what this means is that although locutus sum and dictus sum look the same, and they both are participles, and they both have some form of sum tacked onto them, yet do not think of them as related. They are not the same thing. Rather, think of the participle locutus and the perfect stem as related. Why? Because both of those mean having spoken. And then if you add on sum or the personal ending e, then they both mean I spoke. So don't think of the 2 past participles as related. Rather, think of the perfect active participle and the perfect stem as related. All right. So having done that, here then are all the deponents that you have had so far. And you just had the green forms. But now we're going to get the orange forms, the third principal part. So looking at this, I've divided it up into first conjugation, A verbs, second conjugation, long E verbs. Third conjugation is all together, nothing in short I verbs, and fourth conjugation at the bottom is long I verbs. The long A verbs, you don't really need to memorize because you can guess them. Look, they all have atus. So conar, conari, conatus. For, fari, fatus. Those are perfectly regular. Same down at the bottom with fourth conjugation, the long I verbs. You can pretty much guess these. They all have itus. Now, of course, the exception down there is in the white box. You would think it would be oritus, but it's really just ortus, having risen. And you would think it would be operitus, and sometimes it is, but sometimes again the I gets swallowed and it just becomes opertus. That's kind of like the verb you had repertus, having been found.
They both have a double P, opertus and repertus.
So opertus, having waited for. Okay, so try to keep these words straight because it's easy to confuse them. Reperio and operio have to do with discovery. However, this deponent here, aperior, has to do with waiting for. And now how are we going to not confuse these and keep them straight? Well, first I would point out that the OPs are really hidden OBs. That's where they came from. Then looking back at the etymological root word that these came from, pario means to give birth or bear to the light, whereas perior is just your bland old word to experiment and experience. So knowing that, now we can figure out the whole word tree of all the words that come from these root words. So ob normally means in the way of or obstructing, but in this case it kind of means not. So if you're not bearing into the light, then you're doing what? Putting it back into the darkness, covering it, hiding it. Same down low. If you're not experimenting and experiencing yet, but you're just kind of standing in the way, looking to experiment and experience, then you're waiting. So that's where these two come from. Same with re, that comes from exposing to the light by removing the cover back, by pulling back the cover. And that's why that word means find. Okay, so then what are the two? So then the two ways to keep track of these is to remember that if it has an A, then it has to do with giving birth, like parturition, ovoviviparous, postpartum, all these words have to do with birth. But if it has an E, then that's just your bland old word to experiment and experience or wait. The other way you can keep track of it is that the experiment words often have a double P, whereas the discovery words have a single P, except in the weird reduplication sign right here. So in general, you can think of the A as going with a single P. Of course it would go with a P. It's so easy to say pa that you're just going to shoot into that and not waste your time on a double P. Whereas an E is a much more delicate matter, and so the speaker will take the time to properly pronounce both P's. Of course, you could just think of the idea of two P's being like extra long, so you have to boring old wait for them, or two P's being extra sure, so you're going to experiment over and over and over. That's another little mental cue you can remember to keep these two straight. All right, so but other than those two, the long I verbs are pretty regular. That means that the two things you need to focus on are the second conjugation and the third conjugation. And in particular, the ones I really want you to focus on are the ones in the white box here, because these follow no rhyme nor reason. You just have to memorize them. So gredior, gredi, gressus, having stepped or gone. Labor, labi, lapsus. You sometimes talk about prelapsarian Adam, Adam before he slipped and committed the first sin. Okay. Loquor, loqui, locutus, having spoken. Have you ever used an interlocutor? Someone who speaks between you and someone else over there? Morior mori mortuus, having died. Complector complecti complexus, having embraced. Proficiscor, proficisci, profectus, having set out, made forth, taken off, if it were a bird. Sequor sequi secutus, having followed. Can you think of 3 consecutive numbers? Okay, so those are the hard ones. There's also hard ones are gavisus, having rejoiced. The word intuitus is kind of intuitive, so you probably don't need to remember that one because it's so intuitive. And reveritus means having revered. Okay, so these are what you've got to learn this semester. Of course, up close, this is what they look like. And if you noticed in your word list here, we only have 2 semi-deponents here. The main semi-deponent I want you to pay attention to is theo. This is weird. Theo has, here you've got an active form, a passive-looking form, although it's not quite passive, because you would think it would have an macron over the E, but it doesn't. So it's kind of like nothing at all, but it just means to become or to occur. And then factusum, which definitely looks passive. So we've got active, nothing, and passive. Theo is just all over the map. All right, so what does this mean? You've already had factusum. That was the perfect tense of what verb? Facio, good. So facio meant to make, and factusum was I was made. But here we have it being used as I became, or we could have I occurred. Do you believe me that I was made and I became mean the same thing, basically? Do you agree with me that I became or I occurred means the same thing as I was made? Do you buy that? Well, if you buy it, then this will make sense to you. If you don't, then I'm sorry. So theo, fieri, factusum is a semi-deponent, not only because it has both kinds of forms, but also because it has this meaning that's like halfway in between active and passive. You didn't occur actively, like you didn't choose to do it, and you weren't made passively, because it's not totally facior. It's just like become, which means like something happened to me, but I didn't do it. Like it's passive, but there was no agent. All right, so theo is the worst of the semi-deponents, but it's kind of irregular, so you really need to focus on it. Its forms here are theo, fis, fit, fimus, fitus, fiunt, fiebam, fiebas, fiebat, fiebamus, fiebatus, fiebant, fiam, fies, fiet, fiemus, fietus, fiant. And then the prefix are factusum, factus est, factus est.
Factisumus, factiestis, factisunt.
Alrighty. And then gaudio, gaudere, gavisus sum means to rejoice. This is a semi-deponent because we've got actives in the first 2 principal parts and passive forms in the third. All right. Okay, so I've got 2 ways that I want you to get familiar using these new PAPs, like the one on the left. Okay, here we're going to compare it to PPPs. And yeah, I said they don't correspond, but here I'm going to force them to correspond just so you get the feeling for how they work together. But to make this work down low, they have to be in separate sentences because you can't have a feminine subject and a masculine subject. So these are 2 separate ideas, even though I've put them side by side. Okay, so the passive thing in white over here means having been blanked, tractatus. Over there, it's active, having blanked, having tried. I guess he was too heavy. Conata est, period, sed non tractatus est. So that means is having tried or has tried, or better yet is just tried. And these correspond to has been dragged and was dragged. And there's your meaning. The bottom ones are the best translations. So you see here how these work. So you've probably grown familiar in seeing a passive in a double word tractatus plus est. Now you've got to get familiar in seeing an active in a similar
Looking thing.
conata plus est. Okay, and here's the second way I want to introduce you to these PAPs. these are the words we're going to use in this next story, so you might want to stop the video and get familiar with these. You want to be able to say them. And then in this next exercise, you can use either the present or the perfect. Don't use both.
Simultaneously. But I'm going to do both right now, one after the other.
First, I'll do present. So this is to convey to you how these PAPs can work in the past and set the stage for the
main verb.
So let's see what happens here. Hail Caesar, about to die, we salute you. All right, Caesarem intuiti, which what does that mean? Having looked unto Caesar, fantor, they speak. So what came first?
The intuiti or the fantor?
The intuiti came first. That's how you use a PAP without a form of sum. If you just use it by itself, then it implies something already completed, actively in the past. Having looked, now they speak. Let's keep going. Having spoken, say intuuntur. And you can figure out what that means. What do they do to themselves? Plural. Intuitus, now this is just referring to the guy on the left over there. In amicum sequitur. What does he do? Secutus progreditur. What does he do? He does something pro, which means forward. Progressus regreditur. What does he do? Gressus, hint, look at the arrow here. Inamicus labitur. What does the inamicus do? Inamicus lapsus, non orator. Can you look at the picture and figure out cur non orator? Hint, hint, hint. Look at the coloring of the sand. Non orsus moritor. Inimico mortuo. Now, what construction is that up there? I hope you said ablative absolute. That's another way that the PAP can be used to set the stage before the action occurs. Inimico mortuo ipse gauditur. Now, this is another really good way that you can use the PAP to set the stage before the main action. And this is even better because this allows us to have two separate ideas and therefore two separate subjects. Remember how back there I said that these two could not be in the same sentence because you can't have both a feminine and a masculine subject? Well, now with the assistance of the ablative absolute, you can do it. So it's with the enemy having died, he himself rejoices.
So now we have two separate subjects or doers or agents doing radically different things, both in the same sentence.
One guy's dying while the other one's rejoicing.
Okay. And non gavisus, quia mortuus, inimicus trahetur. Alrighty. So now that we've done the presents, let's go do the perfects. So this is like I'm telling a story, not like it's happening in real time, but like I'm reporting it as a reporter. So here we go. Caesarem intuiti fati sunt. So which occurred first, the intuiti or the fati, or were they simultaneous? Well, this is also where you apply relative time. So the intuiti is a secondary verb, and so yeah, that actually is relative to the time of the
Fati. And the fati
is already in the past, so this is even further in the past. All right, so yeah, intuiti occurs first and then the fati later, even though they're both perfect tense. Okay, let's keep going. Fati se intuiti sunt. Intuitus
inimicum secutus est.
secutus progressus est. Note the arrow. Progressus regressus est. Gressus inimicus lapsus est. Inimicus lapsus non orsus est. Non orsus mortuus est. Inimico mortuo ipse gavisus est. Non gavisus quia mortuus inimicus tractatus est. Did the inimicus tractate actively out of there, or was it passive? Yeah, that's not a PAP. See the abbreviation, it's a PPP. Yes, okay. All right, so hopefully you're getting the hang of these PAPs and also watching out for them for making sure they're not PPPs, and also seeing how they can function in a sentence, either by themselves or with a form of sum to create the perfect tense. Okay, so I want you to bring together what you've learned and answer these meta questions about the grammar and syntax of the things you've experienced. So see how many of these you can get on the first try through. Okay, so stop the video and turn it on when you're ready to see the answers. And the answers? Okay, so number 6 here, what is a verb that has both a normal principal part and a deponent principal part? That's called a semi-deponent. Okay, so for semi-deponents, remember how I spoke about those 3 semi-deponents that you need to know in the gray back there? Fio, fieri, factus sum, gaudeo, gaudere, gavisus sum. All right, the final activity, see if you've got this material for chapter 21. I know it has been a lot, is to see if you can do one of these stories, and it's going to use this vocab. So stop the video now and go through these. I suggest you just recite them and take note of the ones that you don't already know. In particular, of course, pay attention to the third principal parts. You won't know any of those, so you may have to refer back to this page frequently if you forget something. But in any case, recite this, so at least you'll have a chance of getting the third and fourth principal parts.
Okay, now that you have done all those exercises, here is the big test, whether you can put it all together. So how are you going to do this? Well, there are certain tip-offs. If you see a call-out symbol like this, that's me telling you that I want an indirect statement, which is, if you forgot, an accusative subject plus an infinitive. If you see an optional HB, it might or might not be there, plus blanked or blanken, then what do you think that is? Right, that's how you translate the PPP, which is just your fourth principal part, perfect passive participle. Now, this next one here, if you see 2 blanks with a little dash in between, that's the way I make you do the passive voice of this tense, this stage. So the passive of vocavi, I called, would be vocatus sum. So that is the PPP plus a form of sum. And then lastly, if you see 2 blanks side by side, and then especially if you see one of these 2 other things, either with right before the 2 blanks, or parentheses, or both, parentheses and with, then that's me asking you for an ablative absolute. So in case you forgot what that is, that's 2 ablatives, and one of them might be a PPP. So that's how you do these blanks. And if you forgot a word, just go back and look at the previous slide. All right, so stop the video and attempt these. All right, here we go. And the answers? Okay, hopefully you did that well. If you didn't, figure out what you did wrong. Now the next page, it's just the same, so stop the video and start it as you're ready to see each line revealed. And the first line's answers? That was a triple ablative. There were not just 2, but 3 ablatives. Really, it was 2 ablative absolutes combined into one, with both of the second ablatives talking about the first ablative, which is cruore. And the next line?
I'll just cue the answers in the next of these lines with a hand movement.
At this point, you've learned the perfect tense, the perfect passive infinitive, the perfect active infinitive, all the ways those are implied in subjective infinitive, complementary infinitive, indirect statement, and an ablative absolute. And now we've also learned deponents in their perfect tense. So It's a lot. I don't know why your textbook put all these things into stage 21, but they did it. So good luck and just do your best. And with time, you'll learn the stuff that you mess up on. And so just be patient with yourself. But I'm sure in any case that you're ready to start the stories for stage 21. Walete and good luck. Bye-bye.